Welcome, everybody. Bonjour. My name is Mark Winfield. I'm Associate Professor of Environmental Studies at York University, and I'm here today in particular in my capacity as co-chair of the Sustainable Energy Initiative at the Faculty of Environmental Studies. The initiative is our effort to integrate our teaching, research, and partnership activities around sustainable energy at the faculty at the graduate and undergraduate levels, and we're also we're increasing number of Ph.D. students in the field as well. I want to start with a few words of thanks, in particular to James Gaeta, who has been handling the logistics in the organization and has done a very nice job, and the people here at the Osgood Professional Development Center as well, who've helped us with all of the organization. I also have to thank the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. In fact, I have to thank them twice over because we're here because of, in fact, 2 grants from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. The first one involving partners from a number of universities in Canada and the United States was around unlocking the potential of smart grids. Indeed, Ian Rowlands from University of Waterloo, who's one of the lead co-investigators, is here. And it was through that project that we began to make contacts with people in other jurisdictions working on energy issues. And I think it says something about the state of the situation around energy and electricity that a year ago, when we began to think about this, we began to have this horrifying realization that we were well networked among those of us in the academic community in Ontario who work on energy and electricity issues, but that we had no idea who we should be talking to in Quebec on these issues. And I'm very, very pleased to say that we now have answered that question and indeed have begun to collaborate in a number of different ways. We've also were the beneficiaries as a direct result of that of a second Social Science Managed Research Council grant specifically for the purpose of putting on this workshop here. Olivier and I are the co-investigators for that, and we'll be doing a follow-up session in Montreal on April the 8th. This workshop really flows from an earlier workshop we did on May 23rd with Pierre, with Jack Gibbons from the Clean Air Alliance and Jack Burkham of Brookfield Power, which sort of was our preliminary discussion of the relationship between Ontario and Quebec around electricity and around climate change. And then in parallel, Normand Mousseau organized a workshop in Montreal on November the 4th on energy and climate change issues in Eastern Canada, which is further strengthening the ties that we were beginning to build. And that, in fact, led to the release of a white paper that was endorsed by myself and Pierre and Normand and a number of other people in this room on the potential for a shared energy strategy among the Eastern Canadian provinces. So this has been gathering some momentum over the past few months. And there's interest, I think, in greater collaboration on these issues for a number of different reasons. Here in Ontario, there have been concerns over the risks and costs of nuclear refurbishments. Questions around Darlington and Bruce B are very much on the table. Many have been calling, led by the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, but I think others share the view as well, for a serious exploration of alternatives before irrevocable commitments to those projects are made. And the relationship with Quebec has consistently come up in that conversation for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. Ontario also has the need to balance the substantial amounts of intermittent renewable energy sources, wind and to a lesser extent solar, coming onto the Ontario grid, and there have been concerns that there is a potential for some of these assets to become effectively stranded and not fully utilized if we don't have some grid scale storage and balancing capacity. The immediate impact, of course, would be that we would likely use natural gas-fired generation for that purpose, which is both expensive and has environmental consequences of its own. Ontario has also shown a renewed interest in interest on climate change mitigation. So there are a number of sort of directions coming from Ontario, and we had a sense of some potential interest on the Quebec side as well, also driven by a convergence of factors, that the traditional export markets for Quebec electricity have been weakening as a result of the availability of relatively inexpensive fracked natural gas in the United States, which has effectively been replacing hydro imports as the marginal fuel south of the border. And Quebec also has a very strong desire to see action on climate change, but there were concerns, indeed they were expressed in Normand's report, over the risks associated with participating in what is so far a relatively small carbon market, essentially the sort of remnant of what had been put in motion by the Western Climate Initiative in the latter part of the last decade. And in the end, only Quebec and California are actually participating formally in the market. Ontario was supposed to, but has yet to do that. And there are also concerns in both provinces about the focus of the federal government's attention, at least as it relates to energy, on Western Canada and to a lesser extent the East Coast offshore, to the apparent exclusion of everywhere and everything else. So here, what we sought to do in particular was to bring Quebec perspectives on these issues to Ontario. We're very conscious that the two provinces have moved in the direction of greater collaboration around electricity and climate change. We saw the formal announcements from the premiers at the end of November. Although I think most of us on this panel see this as initial steps and in some ways largely symbolic, but see the potential for much deeper and much more substantial collaboration going forward. And as part of that effort, we're going to have, as I mentioned, a second round in Montreal on April the 8th. So I'm going to start by introducing our speakers, and our first speaker today is Colleen Kaiser, who is a first-year Ph.D. student in our program at the Faculty of Environmental Studies. Her research is situated in the fields of ecological economics and political economy, with a specific focus on polycentric approaches to collective action on climate change and low-carbon energy transitions in the North American context. Before entering our PhD program, Colleen earned an MSc in Environmental Policy and Regulation from the London School of Economics, where her dissertation focused on nuclear energy policy in Ontario. Outside of the academic world, Colleen has worked as an environmental consultant, most recently with the Walter and Duncan Gordon Foundation, where her work is focused on hydraulic fracking and water quality monitoring in the Mackenzie River Basin. And I've asked Colleen specifically to put some larger context around the conversations between Ontario and Quebec in the context of low-carbon transitions and the roles of subnational governments in that process. Please.